let me introduce you CA Girish Chand. He is a director taxation with over 25 years of experience in finance and audit executive roles. He is heading the MCA Gulf VAT practice covering UAE, Bahrain, and Oman, and is soon planning to open his own venture in Saudi Arabia as well. Conducted various VAT seminars for large companies, professional bodies, industry groups, and authorities. He has also been interested in writing blogs and articles for leading publications such as Khaleej Times on subjects like VAT. He is also content advisor for a popular VAT website, which is www.allaboutvat.com. And CA Girish is well versed in broad level detailings, JV structures, and advisory role for executive management. Girish has recently done a detailed study of e-invoicing in Saudi, and today he will share his thoughts and insights for our better. So let us all welcome CA Girish Chand.
Assalamu alaikum and very good evening to everybody. I think, this is possibly, I must confess, this is one of the seminars where I've seen the maximum amount of attendees. Okay, so kudos to Tally for organizing this event. It just goes to demonstrate that, how popular is Tally as a software solution. And obviously, basically people are looking at a very cost-efficient solution, and that is what is driving the attendance. Okay, regarding the e-invoicing, as basically Priyesh mentioned, we have hardly a month left, and I'm sure there is a lot of anxiety around how this whole thing will work. Okay, primarily in my presentation today, I will just basically run through in terms of what is the background of e-invoicing, basically the definitions associated with e-invoicing. Okay, what are the various implementation phases? And lastly, obviously there are a lot of challenges, right? So just to enumerate the challenges and basically my humble recommendations in terms of how we can basically do a very successful invoicing implementation. I think basically Saudi Arabia has embarked on and I must say that this is one of the first in the region which has brought in the invoicing solution, right? And this is more in line with the international tax practices, where effectively what they are trying to do is make the entire process more kind of transparent, more robust, and obviously from the tax authority perspective, also ensuring that basically that the tax system is more efficient. Okay, so let's dwell into the background of the e-invoicing introduction. Okay, so why was e-invoicing basically introduced? Like I mentioned, that this is one of the international best practices, where generally what you're looking at is that the system of e-invoicing is basically towards the drive of digitization. Okay, so primarily I think one is that it is encouraging fair competition, because it ensures that there isn't a system where some businesses are actually basically complying with the systems, whereas some businesses are not complying with the businesses. So at least it's a methodology of ensuring fair competition. Okay, also from a consumer protection perspective, right? It is also ensuring that it's not a case of that you are issued a tax invoice, however basically that VAT that is being collected is not deposited with the authority. So this is another kind of an electronic system which ensures that basically that whatever tax is collected, that is deposited with the authorities. And how does that happen? We'll kind of go through the process and understand more of it. Obviously, one of the primary objectives is to kind of basically the hidden economy transactions to be basically reduced, right? So what is happening is that through the e-invoicing mode, we are putting in systems and processes by which entities are expected to kind of obviously in the first stage is generate, and in the subsequent stages integrate with the Zatka system. So like I mentioned, basically, one of the things is about the inter-economy transactions. Of course, there is other element where it is also ensuring that, because of the invoice tracking and the data retention, any kind of concealment or any kind of gaps in terms of the reporting, those are also reduced. Now we are all moving into an age of digitization. Obviously, then the element is coming is that this is also a step in terms of a digitization where the customer is also experiencing basically the as far as the invoicing is concerned, is also able to kind of verify that this is a valid generated invoice. So all the benefits of digitization is what Zatka is also getting by introducing the e-invoicing. And of course, needless to say that this will also ensure that the compliance as far as the, one is the recording and also the reporting, that is increased, because now it is not the stage where you are reporting all the transactions through a return period. However, now it is a stage where effectively, whenever you are generating the invoice, the Zatka system is able to track all those invoices generated. So obviously, that provides them a better control over the reporting that we as taxpayers are doing. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. Right. So when we look at these phases, I think most of you are familiar, but just for in case of people who have not kind of followed the timeline of e-invoicing, the regulations for the e-invoicing was introduced by the Zatka in December 2020. Okay. They introduced further details on the KSA invoicing regulations in May 2021, where they specified the requirements as far as the phase 1 is concerned, and also in terms of the phase 2 part of it. And as we all know, the implementation of e-invoicing is in 2 phases. There is the first phase, which is known as the generation phase, where the taxpayer is expected to generate and store the invoices in the tax compliant system. Okay, and like we said, this is possibly the comparatively easier phase. Okay, then there is the second phase where we talk about the integration phase, where effectively you are required to kind of not only generate but also kind of integrate with the Zatka system, and basically there is an element of either clearance from the Zatka system or reporting into the Zatka system depending upon the type of invoice. This we will see in little detail in the subsequent slides. Okay, now just for so that we get our kind of basically framework right. So let's look at definitions. Primarily, I think we all understand e-invoicing as such, but basically it's an invoice which is generated, stored, and amended in an electronic format. Okay, and now as far as the current invoice is concerned, the format is similar. It just happens to be that we are now putting or enabling, basically the invoices to be kind of, first of all, generated, stored, and subsequently integrated with the Zatka system in an electronic form. Okay, similarly, when you talk about the simplified invoice also, it is similar to what the simplified invoice is being generating now. Okay, however, again, what you're doing is enabling this to be basically generated in a electronic form. Of course, these are, when you talk about it, you can say I generate the invoice on a Word and then store it. Those are not forms of electronic invoices. So handwritten invoices, scanned paper invoices, PDF or Word format, these are not acceptable after 4 December 2021. Right. So now currently, what is the scope of the invoicing? So effectively, any kind of tax invoices that you have been generating currently, any form of simplified tax invoices, that is basically, as you would be knowing, that basically B2C related invoices, and anything which is of a value of less than Saudi Riyal 1,000 as such. Okay, and credit and debit notes that you are currently generating, all these are within the scope of invoicing. Okay, for what type of transactions that you need to issue invoicing? So any of your standard rated invoices for supply of goods and services, those come under it. If there is any export of goods and services, even those are basically included. Okay, intra GCC related supplies, those are also included within the scope of invoicing. Nominal supplies, basically supplies without consideration. To give an example, if basically you are supplying free goods to a customer, right, and you're not charging him or you're not basically billing him on that transaction, as we are aware that if it is not within the norms of the normal samples and stuff, okay, those have to be, you are supposed to basically pay the VAT on that. So what it is requiring now in the e-invoicing regime is that to generate the invoicing, obviously you are not sharing that with the customer, but you are expected to generate and pay the VAT on such nominal supplies. Okay, as we are also aware that currently on advance payments, we are expected to pay the VAT when the payment is received. Okay, now what this will require in the invoicing domain or in the invoicing norm is that basically you will have to generate a e-invoice for such type of advance payments also. For which transactions are excluded from the invoicing regime? Any kind of transaction which is in the form of exempt supplies. So when you talk about, the exempt supplies related to, qualifying financial services or which are basically related to kind of the residential rent. So those kind of exempt supplies, there is not a requirement to raise e-invoicing. You can continue to raise your normal commercial invoices as such, right? Similarly, the advance payment to related to such exempt supplies, there is no requirement. Okay, reverse charge supplies, these are basically related to your import of services from foreign suppliers, right? So these are, as we know that we are generally doing the reverse charge mechanism on such transactions. For such transactions, again, there is no requirement of e-invoicing. You can continue to do your current reporting where based on your foreign supplier invoices, you will continue to report in your VAT return. Similarly, in case of the import of goods and services, which are basically passing through the customs, in those contexts also, since there is also a custom documentation available and the VAT is being recorded and captured, in that scenario also, there isn't a requirement for you to do an e-invoicing. When we look at applicability, I think Priyesh briefly touched upon it. So basically, any taxable person that is a resident in KSA, or if you are having a customer or third party which is doing the billing on behalf of the taxable person, they are required to kind of, basically they are qualified for the e-invoicing. That means they would have to generate all their invoices after 4th of December through invoices. And who are not required to do is primarily the non-resident taxpayers, like who are registered for the KSA VAT. They are basically excluded from the e-invoicing domain. Right, we will just briefly touch upon the formats as the Zatka had basically communicated. So when we look at the standard invoice and the simplified invoice, okay, you can see this bar there, which is primarily the QR code. So when you talk about the standard invoice, what they are saying is that there isn't a requirement necessarily to generate the QR code. Okay, however, in case of the simplified invoice, definitely the QR code would have to be generated, and the QR code needs to be in a specific format, which is referred to as the TLB format. I think the basically in the technical presentation, we'll see a little more details on this particular thing. But if you look at these invoices, they aren't drastically different from what you have been generating so far. Okay, the only difference is that currently you are also enabling the electronic form of the invoice, because there is a requirement to kind of, in the first phase, to store the electronic form of the invoices. Obviously, in the second phase, you are required to kind of, basically seek the clearances. We'll talk about those clearances and all in the subsequent slides. The invoicing. So obviously, like we mentioned, the first phase is the generation phase. So in the generation phase, if you look at the standard invoice, what would happen in this case? It's simple. There isn't a lot of complication, but yes, there is a slight change in the process. So effectively, the supplier would generate the invoice, right? You would be expected to store the e-invoice in his system, okay, and you would share a normal human readable invoice with the customer. So that is what is the expectation as far as a standard invoice process is concerned. Now, when we talk of the simplified invoice, similar process, the only difference here is that basically when you are in the B2C scenario, uh, it would also be there would also be a QR code mandatorily need to be generated the invoice, and effectively the customer would be able to scan the QR code, or basically, and I think the expectation is that there would be specific softwares also through which you can actually scan the QR code and get basic details of on the invoice as such, right? Even in this scenario, the expectation is that the supplier should store all the invoices that have been generated, and the storing part of it is primarily from the perspective of, in case of any kind of ZATCA inspection, you should be able to demonstrate that you have got all the invoices that you have basically generated through the e-invoicing. What are the additional requirements in the phase one? Of course, you need to use a compliant e-invoicing system. ZATCA has been basically, they have not been approving, but they have been kind of qualifying the solution providers. Okay, and Tally is one of the qualified solution provider, right? The invoice is expected, obviously the Arabic, it should be in Arabic, including other language. So if your invoice is in English, that's fine, but as long as Arabic is also there. Like I mentioned, you should have the ability to generate and store the e-invoice. Okay, so if you see the the tax invoice is normal, all the requirements are there, right? The QR code, like I mentioned, is mandatory for simplified invoice. However, it's optional for standard invoice. Now, what does the QR code contain? It contains basically the seller name, the sender's VAT registration reference, the date and stamp of the invoice, the VAT total, and the invoice total with VAT. This is all expected to be there in the QR code. Okay, obviously, in terms of preparation for the invoicing, you need to understand the invoice requirements. You need to acquire and upgrade to a compliant e-invoicing system. Okay, you need to test the invoices, because primarily you need to see that the invoices that you are generated, can it be generated from the compliant e-invoicing system, right? And also the element of staff training in terms of readiness for the invoicing, because there is a slight change in the process in which you are doing it. So you need to ensure that the staff are trained to ensure that those processes are followed effectively. Like on the B2C case, when you're talking of it, that the invoice is generating with the QR code, the QR code is fine, that the invoices are properly stored. It isn't a case that, that you are, not storing the invoices properly. Obviously, all of this would be basically enabled by a compliant e-invoicing system. Right now, what is prohibited? Okay, you cannot cancel invoices. That's why they refer to as any kind of adjustments to be done through the electronic, which is either a debit note or a credit note, which basically has the reference of the original invoice, okay, and the invoice reference as such. Yeah, so so that is expected in case if you have to change any invoice, that you should be doing to the debit or the credit note. Right, these are more technical, where we talk about user management capabilities. Like, you cannot have an anonymous user access. Effectively, you need the login needs to be there, and even the user session, basically the audit trail needs to be there. Who has access, who has created, right? All that access should be available as far as the e-invoicing model is concerned. Right, needless to say, you cannot tamper with the e-invoices or their trail, because that's something that they want the security of the system to be done. Okay, There's another element, and I think this is creating a little bit of confusion for people, the ability to create multiple invoice sequence. Okay, now what it is referred to is that if you have multiple branches, it is understandable that you would have different invoice sequence. What it is talking about is that for the compliant software, for example, if it is a POS machine, effectively the expectation is that there is a single serial number and that the software is not capable of doing multiple series in that particular machine. So that is the expectation, but it is quite understandable that if you have multiple branches, or if you have invoice sequence for different customers, sorry, not customers, for different branches, so those all are fine. Yeah. When we come to the phase 2, the process changed slightly. Okay, now this process is much more I would say, basically it requires the clearance from the ZATCA as such, right? So what would happen in this process is that the supplier would generate the invoice, okay, and after generation, it would go on to the ZATCA portal. Of course, the invoice is supposed to be, transferred to the ZATCA portal based on, the guidelines that ZATCA will issue. Actually, the phase 2 guidelines are still awaited primarily on the technical perspective. Okay, so it will basically be sent to the ZATCA portal. Then ZATCA will kind of approve those invoices, and then subsequently it needs to be shared to the customer. So in case of a B2B and stuff, so that is the process that is expected to come through in the phase 2, which is from 1st Jan 2023. On the simplified invoice, considering that this is a B2C invoice, you are not expected to see clearance. But what happens is that you are expected to report within 24 hours of generating the invoice. So in the simplified invoice, what would happen is that you would generate the invoice, share it with the customer. Of course, the QR code would be there, but you would also be expected to kind of within 24 hours of the generation of the invoice to basically report to ZATCA, okay, and all those, I think the detailed guidelines are expected as far as the phase 2 are concerned, but that is the expectation as far as the the simplified invoice is concerned, where within 24 hours it has to be reported on the ZATCA portal. I think the requirements from the phase 2 perspective, obviously, you need to have the capability to connect to the internet, because right now there is a, the interaction with ZATCA increases in the phase 2. So in some cases, the invoices have to be cleared. And if not, at least within 24 hours, you're supposed to send it to the ZATCA system. So one of the requirements is that whatever solution, it needs to have the capability to connect to the internet so that this transfer of data to ZATCA can happen. Okay. Basically, when we talk, as we mentioned earlier, B2B, there is a clearance element, and for the simplified invoice, there is a reporting element. Okay, again, they have specified the format, which is basically, the XML format, okay, or if it has to be PDF E3 with the embedded XML. Okay, I'm not a technical guy, but I'm sure the Tally guys will elaborate a little more on this. Okay, what is expected is that the phase 2 would happen in waves. That's what they have said, which would mean that, like we saw with the VAT registration, obviously, the introduction of e-invoicing would happen in phases. And I would imagine that the large entities would go in first, and subsequently it will be rolled out to the other entities. What is now known is that basically it will start from 1st Jan 2023. But again, it will start in a phased manner. Okay, now as we said, the preparation part of it, the solution, the internet connection, obviously you need to get the compliance system, right? And the testing, and again, the staff training needs to happen, because now there is a different mode of generating the invoice as far as the phase 2 is concerned, as we have seen earlier. Right, so the same prohibitions are there, except there is an additional element is there. Since there is an interaction with the ZATCA, and they are basically generating a cryptographic key. So the element, that cryptographic key is, is also requiring a private key at the solution level. So what the one of the requirements is that it should, the invoicing solution should not have the export of the cryptographic key, which effectively in simple terms means that you should not be able to kind of unlock the cryptographic key that is provided by Zatka. Okay, the date and time stamp of the particular invoice, that also, there should not be any change to it. So these are all the expectations in the e-invoicing solution, and I'm sure any compliant e-invoicing solution would have all this built into it as such. Okay, if we look at the challenges that we have, as we have seen, the what is the requirement, obviously it comes with certain challenges, right? Yeah, the usual is the short time frame, and we are seeing the kind of basically the rush to comply with the solution. And today's the list of attendees is telling us that a lot of people are waiting for Tally to kind of roll out the invoicing solution, and Tally has done that. It will give you time to basically review it, test it, and be ready for 4th of December. But as we are saying that besides the solution, it's also the process that we need to put in place. Okay, obviously one of the challenges of existing ERP system to provide you invoicing. Hopefully, as far as you guys who are using Tally, I hope that is not really a challenge. Okay, now what it requires is a change where when you talk about returns and adjustments, they all have to be done through the e-invoicing mode, through the electronic notes, as explained earlier. Okay, one critical element which we talk about is that effectively, unlike the earlier VAT stages where business could go on, right? Now what is there is that the controls are getting put by Zatka at the stage of the generation of the invoice. So that would mean that we have to be ready, so that our business, there is no business interruption and our business transactions go smoothly. So this is also a challenge for us to ensure that, that we are ready so that we don't have any interruption on our business operations. Right. The one of the things we have seen is that even the QR code, it is not a normal QR code, and it needs to be generated in a specific format as referred to as the TLB format. Okay, so this is something that which needs to be ensured as far as the solution is concerned. When we talk about phase 2, the challenges in the phase 2, yeah, one element of it is, I think whenever we are going in for the solution, I think we need to see that the solution is capable of handling both the phases. The first phase might be comparatively simpler because it's only about the generation. But what is required is that the solution is not only capable of generating, but it's also capable of integration with Zatka. And that is critical because, in the second phase, you cannot issue an invoice without getting the clearances as far as the B2B case invoices are concerned. So that's something important that we need to consider, that that both the phases are getting satisfied. Like I mentioned, internet connectivity, and these are primarily when you talk about POS machines and all. I'm sure there are a lot of POS machines which are not connected to the internet as such. So this could be an implementation related challenge which needs to be overcome. Okay, the other element is there, and this is true of phase 1 also, but more for phase 2, that in terms of the we need to now put in a process of ensuring proper reconciliation between our books and the invoicing, right? Because let's remember that, as far as currently what you're doing is that you are reporting as per your books and the transactions, whereas the visibility is not there with Zatka. But come 4th of December, the visibility increases. So it is very important to have these reconciliations in place so that, you are not, in a non-compliant position as far as the VAT reporting are concerned. Okay, there are a few recommendations which are stemming from obviously the challenges and the processes that are defined. Okay, like I said, basically we need to ensure and go for solution which is capable of handling both the phases of invoicing. Otherwise, it could be starting something and which you might have to, it's like starting on a journey and then you having to change the phases of e-invoicing that is required. Of course, we spoke about the internet connectivity, okay, the TLB format QR code, and the proper reconciliation to be put in place so that we have VAT compliance. Okay. More important is, I think, I'm sure most of you have a little more complex. It's very important to put in an action plan of how you are going to A, get the solution, and B, be ready for the second phase. So primarily there needs to be that, detailed understanding and the action plan for adhering to both the phases. I think I'll just take the liberty of 1 minute of just basically just listing as us as MCA. We are in UAE based organization with presence in Oman, Bahrain. Okay, and shortly we will be in KS also. And these are our gambit of services. We provide audit assurance, corporate service, okay, taxation, accounting support. On the consulting side, we do governance, risk, compliance, advisory, corporate finance, and the various other services. In case if you need to contact us, please feel free for any of your requirements as such.